And our guest for this hour, joining us, national trial attorney, big case, Michael Jaafar. Michael, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show. But first and foremost, I want to get your reaction to the testimony of Sophia Ricci. I got to say, it seems to be some selective memory stuff going on. And, I don't want to cast any aspersions at all. But also, it struck me as a bit weird that mom calls her down, dad's on the floor, and doesn't say anything about what actually happened. Your thoughts?
In terms of order of priority of the most credible witness you could have in a case like this, the adult child of a husband or a wife killing the other, that is the most credible type of witness you could ever possibly have. The demeanor of this girl is so credible that she clearly is not so far on one side or the other. So I was wondering up until the last 2 minutes why the prosecution would bring her up first, because it seemed like she was kind of helping the defense. They've been fighting for a long time. My dad was basically an alcoholic. He would drink a lot. He'd come home from work. He'd drink a few. So it seemed like she was helping the defense up until the last 2 minutes where she was detailing the incident. And I want to see how her testimony concludes. But I'm still baffled because the prosecution knows exactly what she's going to say, and they're leading her to say what she's saying. And up until the last 2 minutes, in my opinion, clearly helpful to the defense. But right now, she's in the guts of the situation. I really want to see how it concludes. But her credibility, in my opinion, would be more than any examiner, more than any forensic person. Her credibility, because here is a situation where we're trying to decide. A spouse killed the other spouse. Why did they do it? It seems like we're getting a lot of these cases lately, and this is the first one where there's an actual adult child living in the house with them and can testify to the relationship. She's putting us right in the middle of their relationship. So far, I'm still a little baffled as to why the prosecution brought her first.
Especially because I feel like the prosecution is surprised that she says she doesn't recall. So they start off by saying, what was your mother, what did she tend to be arguing about? I don't recall. And the prosecution says, oh, you don't remember? No, I don't remember. So I felt, Michael, like maybe the witness wasn't well prepared. Here's your transcript just to read through so you can recall. We know it's traumatic and it's hard. We just need you to testify. And I also think I find her very credible, but if I were a juror, I'd go back there and say, she didn't remember a lot. So I don't know that she knows enough for us to conclude what happened that day.
Yeah, she didn't witness the incident, but the beginning of her testimony where she was detailing, essentially, I was left with the impression from her testimony that my dad was an alcoholic, right? So eventually the defense is going to take this case on. They're going to put on witnesses. They're going to then have a closing argument, and they're going to reference back to the beginning of her testimony because no one knows more. What are they going to do? Show bar receipts or receipts at the grocery store of every time he bought liquor? I mean, that's not possible. You have the daughter saying he drank a lot. Right, and they fought a lot. So I'm still baffled as to why the prosecution would bring her, because so far her testimony has basically established that her kind of what the defense wants, which is her father was an alcoholic, but she didn't witness the incident, but she definitely remembered the alcoholism. So to me, I'm still baffled by it. I want to see if there's some payload coming at the end of her testimony from the prosecution. There must be, otherwise it's almost like prosecutorial malpractice. Again, I want to see how it plays out, but so far I'm still baffled as to why they brought her out. Unless they just want to get her out of the way before the defense takes the case, unless that's what their strategy is. So I'm just a little bit confused.
Yeah, I'm not sure you'd call her first if that was your reason for calling her. So I think there's more to it than that. And also, for a year prior to this incident, he was sober. So that wasn't an issue for this particular day. But quickly, you mentioned in the last 2 minutes, you began to understand why she was called. What happened? What part of her testimony led you to think, okay, now I can kind of see why the state called her?
Because she started talking about the incident at hand. She started talking about it. She's still not done talking about it, but she's back to see why the prosecution, because up until that point, she was just establishing a pattern of a terrible relationship between their parents, right? So up until that point, it's almost like a Rorschach test. Like if you're a defendant, and if you're in the jury and you've witnessed domestic abuse, you're gonna almost always sympathize with the woman. Almost always, right? Juries, when you look at a domestic abuse situation, very rarely do you sympathize with the husband. So that's why I was baffled up until the end. And at the end, I started seeing her testify about the actual incident at hand. And based on the way the balance of her testimony comes out, she might be able to break, kind of foreclose certain options for the defense later when they give their theory of how the incident happened, right? So that's why I started to kind of shed light. And now I started saying, oh, I get it, because she's going to testify about the actual incident. The prosecution must know what she's going to say, and what she's going to say, the prosecution believes it's going to help them. That's why I started to kind of change my mind.
All right, fair enough. We also know that she was the one that ultimately called 911. We'll hear what she had to say on that call when we come back, so keep it here on Court TV. All right, still with us, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, you heard more of her testimony there, the 911 call, the aftermath, what she saw when she came downstairs. Was the juice worth the squeeze?
You know what? I keep thinking about how important the cross-examination is going to have to be. It didn't hit home for me. I'm still a little bit baffled as to why she was the first witness. This witness is a young woman, and this incident happened 3 years ago. So she was basically a kid at the time that it happened, right? And we saw the destruction that it has caused for her, right? When they played that 911 tape, she broke down, right? But this is where the defense table earns their money. This is where they have to come in and be super, super kind. Once she's done, obviously there's a lot more, maybe a little bit more, maybe a lot more. But when the defense table comes in for cross-examination, they're going to have to be super kind, sympathetic, and they're going to have to elicit things that benefits their client, right? What do they want to benefit? What do they want to elicit? Your father was aggressive. Have you seen him hit your mom before? We don't know that, right? But we're going to see. They kind of alluded to the abuse in their opening statement. They alluded to it, but this is an actual witness, a person in the house at the time who knew more about these two people than anybody else in the world, right? So they're going to earn their money if they do a good job. They have to be super kind, super polite, and I still want to see what happens here with the balance of the direct examination. To answer your question, Michael, was it worth the squeeze? I still don't know. I still don't know. Maybe, maybe not.
But, as hard as it was to watch her go through this, I do think they had to bring her in to get the 911 call in. And, of course, that's an important part of the case, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going chronologically, they start